She mocked his attempt to pull the sword, then fell to her knees in awe. The air in Athelgard tasted of static and cold, ancient stone. It clung to the back of Ezra's throat, a constant reminder that he was breathing an atmosphere processed by machinery older than his own species' recorded history. The grand processional, the cavernous hall that led to the warlord's throne, was a masterpiece of brutalist acoustics. Every footstep, every rustle of his diplomatic robes echoed with unnerving clarity, amplified and distorted by the sharp, unforgiving angles of the monolithic walls. It was a place designed to make visitors feel small, to strip them of their confidence before they ever reached the seat of power. It was working. Even the elder scholar walking beside him, a native Krillian with skin like cracked granite, seemed to shrink within his voluminous robes. "The warlord values strength above all else, Arbiter," the scholar murmured, his voice a dry whisper that the hall turned into a sibilant hiss. His champions believe the sword, verdict, can only be drawn by the strongest arm in the sector. "And you, scholar?" Ezra kept his own voice low, a practiced diplomatic calm that the hall couldn't quite manage to twist into something menacing. The scholar's multifaceted eyes shifted, a flicker of something that might have been dissent. "I believe our history is longer than our memories. The old texts speak of a song, not a struggle." They reached the end of the hall, where two massive guards, clad in obsidian-colored armor, stood before doors of hammered, dark metal. They opened without a sound, revealing the throne room. It was less a room and more a caldera, the floor sloping down towards a central dais. There sat the warlord, a hulking, scarred figure slumped on a throne of jagged stone. Beside him, standing with a posture of coiled energy, was his daughter. The image of her, provided in his briefing files, did no justice to the reality. She was tall, her body a testament to a life of brutal training, encased in functional armor that nonetheless accentuated the powerful lines of her physique. A cascade of stark white hair was pulled back from a face that was all sharp, feline angles, marked with dark, intricate patterns that flowed along her cheekbones. Her ears, longer and more pointed than a human's, twitched slightly at their arrival, her golden eyes narrowing. This was Kirayan. As they approached, the warlord stirred, his voice a gravely rumble. "The Concordiate sends a child to oversee the judgment? They mock us." Ezra inclined his head, a gesture of respect that cost him nothing. "I am Diplomat Ezra of the Terran Confederacy, warlord. I am here only to ensure your traditions are upheld." Kirayan pushed off from the throne, her movements fluid and predatory. She circled him slowly, her armored boots making no sound on the stone floor. Her proximity was a physical pressure, a deliberate act of intimidation. She was a head taller than him, and the sheer density of her presence was palpable. He could smell the clean metallic scent of her armor and a faint, wilder scent beneath it, something like dry earth and lightning. "Tradition," she scoffed, her voice a low, melodic contralto that held a sharp edge of contempt. She stopped directly in front of him, so close he had to tilt his head back to meet her gaze. "Our tradition is written in blood and bone. It is a test of a warrior's spirit, of their strength. Look at you." She reached out not to strike, but with a clinical curiosity, and prodded his shoulder with a single armored finger. The casual force of it made him brace himself. "You are made of soft skin and weak limbs. You have no claws, no natural armor. What would a creature like you know of strength?" She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still carried throughout the silent hall. "Tell me, little human arbiter, do you think you could even lift verdict, let alone draw it?" Her mockery was plain, a weapon in its own right, intended to unbalance and diminish him before the entire court. He met her intense golden gaze without flinching, his own expression placid. "That is not my role," he said, his voice even. "I am here to observe, not to participate." A cruel smile touched her lips. "Of course, the mouse does not participate in the business of lions. It only watches. Remember your place." She turned and strode back to the throne, the silent dismissal more insulting than any further words could have been. Ezra stood his ground, his heart beating a steady rhythm against his ribs. He had been in rooms with beings who could kill him with a thought, who commanded fleets that could sterilize a planet. But he had never felt so thoroughly appraised and dismissed on such a primal, physical level. He was not a warrior. He was a human. And in Aethelgard, he was beginning to understand that was a profound and dangerous liability. The tour of the city was, as Ezra suspected, another performance for his benefit. Kirain led him through the cavernous, echoing corridors, her long strides forcing him into a brisk walk to keep pace. Her guard detail of 2 hulking warriors followed 10 paces behind, their armored boots striking the stone floor in a heavy, rhythmic beat that served as a constant, oppressive percussion. Kirain herself remained silent, a deliberate choice meant to make him feel inconsequential, a mere piece of diplomatic luggage she was forced to transport. He used the silence to his advantage, his senses taking in every detail. He noted the precise way sound carried, how a whisper could travel the length of a plaza, how certain archways seemed to hum with a faint, residual energy. The city was not just built, it was tuned. Your architects had a remarkable understanding of acoustics, he commented, his voice carefully neutral. Kirain glanced at him, a flicker of surprise in her golden eyes. They understood strength, stone endures, that is all. And yet they shaped the stone to carry a voice. That is a different kind of strength, isn't it? The power to be heard across a great distance without shouting. She did not reply, but he saw a muscle twitch in her jaw. He was probing, looking for the cracks in her certainty. They entered the lower archives, a vast circular chamber where ancient data slates were stored. The elder scholar was waiting, his posture deferential. As requested, Arbiter, the historical records of the Challenge of Judgment. While the scholar retrieved the requested slates, Kirain leaned against a support column, her arms crossed over her armored chest. The posture was casual, but her eyes never left Ezra. She was a predator at rest, every line of her body exuding a quiet, coiled lethality. "You waste your time with dusty myths," she said. "The challenge is simple. The strong prevail." "All evidence suggests otherwise," Ezra replied, accepting a slate from the scholar. "No one has drawn the sword in 4 generations. Your grandfather was the last. Since then, every warlord has ruled by conquest of the throne, not by the judgment. The ritual is a formality to appease the populace." Her eyes narrowed. "My father is the strongest warlord this city has known in centuries. His strength is not in question, but the sword remains unmoved. Why?" She pushed off the column and closed the distance between them in 2 silent steps. Again, she used her physical presence as a weapon, forcing him to stand his ground or retreat. He did neither, simply watching her approach. "Because we are not worthy of the Founder's legacy," she bit out, her voice low and laced with a frustration she clearly hated to reveal. "The bloodlines have weakened." "Or the nature of the test has been forgotten," Ezra countered softly. He held up the slate. "The scholar mentioned a myth, the Song of the Founder." Kirain let out a short, derisive laugh. "A children's story, a lullaby about the city singing to the first king. It's meaningless." "Is it?" Ezra asked. "On my world, songs have brought down walls. Music is a science, it's physics, it's power." She stared at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and contempt. The concept was so alien to her martial way of thinking that she couldn't even begin to process it. She reached out, her fingers brushing the simple fabric of his sleeve, a stark contrast to her armored gauntlet. "Your world is a world of soft things, soft skin, soft words. You think a song can move a blade that has resisted the strongest warriors of my kind. You are even more foolish than I thought." Her touch, light as it was, sent a strange jolt through him. It was not violent, but it was charged with an intensity that had nothing to do with polite contact. It was a judgment, a physical assessment of his weakness. He held her gaze, refusing to be cowed. The air between them was thick with the dust of ages, and an electric, unspoken challenge that went far beyond his diplomatic mission. In her world of physical absolutes, his quiet insistence on a different kind of power was the ultimate heresy, and he could see in the depths of her golden eyes that it fascinated her as much as it repulsed her. The grand chamber of judgment was packed, the air thick with the scents of ozone, hot metal, and the collective anxiety of the Krillian warrior elite. Ezra stood on a raised observation platform with the elder scholar, overlooking the central dais, where the sword verdict jutted from the floor, It was not an ornate weapon. The hilt was simple, wrapped in a material that seemed to absorb the light, and the crossguard was a plain, unadorned bar. But the blade itself, or the part of it that was visible, pulsed with a contained, violet energy that crackled and spat, projecting a palpable field of force that made the hairs on Ezra's arms stand on end. Below, the warlord sat on his throne, his breathing a ragged counterpoint to the hum of the power core. The first champion, a rival faction leader with arms as thick as tree trunks, roared a challenge to the heavens and charged the dais. He gripped the sword with both hands, muscles bulging across his back and shoulders. For a moment, he seemed to move it, a fraction of an inch. Then the violet energy field flared, erupting in a concussive blast that flung the massive Krillian backward as if he were a child's toy. He landed in a heap at the bottom of the dais, his armor smoking, his body still. Medics rushed forward. The next few champions fared no better. Each approached, each was brutally repulsed. The failures stoked the tension in the room to a fever pitch. Then, a path cleared. Grak, Kirain's betrothed, strode toward the dais. He was a mountain of a man, his armor layered and spiked, his face a mask of supreme arrogance. He sneered up at the observation platform, his eyes finding Ezra's. "Watch, little human," his voice boomed, the hall's acoustics carrying it perfectly. "This is how a true warrior claims his prize." He ignored the sword's energy field, relying on sheer brawn. He wrapped his massive hands around the hilt and pulled. His roar of effort was deafening. The violet energy didn't just flare, it coiled around him like a serpent, lifting him from his feet. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, as his armor began to glow cherry red under the strain. Then, with a final sickening crack of energy, he was thrown into the far wall of the chamber. His body leaving a crater in the ancient stone, he did not move. A horrified silence descended, broken only by the warlord's labored breathing. Kirain, her face pale and set, walked from her father's side. She moved with a grim determination, ignoring the murmurs of the court. She was not as large as Grak, but her power was more focused, more refined. She ascended the dais, her expression a mask of concentration. She planted her feet, her hands gripping the hilt. She did not roar. She let out a controlled, explosive breath and pulled, her entire body straining, the muscles in her back and arms cording under her armor. The energy field washed over her, and unlike the others, she held her ground. A low growl of pure effort and pain escaped her lips. The veins in her neck stood out and sweat beaded on her temples. The sword did not move, not a millimeter. For a long, agonizing moment, she battled the unseen force, a living statue of defiance. But the energy was too much. With a cry of frustrated fury, she was forced to release her grip, stumbling back, her hands smoking and her breathing coming in ragged gasps. She had not been thrown, but she had been defeated. The public failure in front of every rival and ally was a deeper wound than any physical injury. Her shoulders slumped just for a second, a crack in her warrior's facade. The warlord struggled to his feet, his voice booming with forced strength. "The judgment has failed. The sword finds no one worthy. I, Vorlag, am still warlord. My daughter's betrothed, Grak, once he is healed, shall be my successor." An uproar swept through the chamber. This was it, the power grab Ezra had been sent to prevent. The factions began to shout, warriors placing hands on the hilts of their weapons. Civil war was seconds away. "Wait," Ezra's voice cut through the noise. It wasn't loud, but the hall, tuned as it was, carried it to every corner. Every eye turned to him. Kirain looked up, her expression a mixture of humiliation and fury. "By the authority of the Galactic Concordiate and the statutes of this very ritual," Ezra announced, his voice steady and clear, "if all champions fail and the Arbiter deems the process compromised, the Arbiter themselves may attempt the challenge to ensure a peaceful transition." A moment of shocked silence was followed by a wave of disbelief, which quickly crested into outright derisive laughter. The sound was deafening. Kirain stared up at him, her lips curled in a sneer of pure contempt, though her eyes held a flicker of pained humiliation. The idea was absurd. It was an insult. He ignored it all. He descended from the platform, his simple diplomatic robes a stark contrast to the armor and warrior's leathers of the Krillians. He walked through the jeering crowd, their scorn washing over him like a physical force. He was the mouse, walking into the lion's den, and the lions were laughing. Kiran watched him approach the dais, her golden eyes blazing with a furious, wounded pride. She saw this as his final, pathetic mockery of her failure. Her entire culture, he was a fool, a dead fool. Ezra stepped onto the dais, the crackling energy of the sword washing over him. He ignored it, just as he ignored the insults and the laughter from the assembled warriors. The chamber was a symphony of scorn, and Kirayan, watching from her father's side, was its conductor. Her face was a mask of cold fury. This soft, weak creature was about to make a mockery of their most sacred tradition. He would be vaporized, and it would be a fitting end to this diplomatic farce. He reached the sword and stopped. He did not brace himself. He did not summon a warrior's roar. He placed his hands lightly, almost reverently, on the cool, dark wrap of the hilt. He closed his eyes, shutting out the hostile world around him, and focused inward. The elder scholar's words echoed in his mind. The old texts speak of a song, not a struggle. He thought of the city's acoustics, the way it carried sound, the way it seemed to be waiting for a specific frequency. He thought of human history, of Gregorian chants that could fill a cathedral, of Tibetan monks whose throat singing could vibrate stone. He thought of physics, of resonant frequency and sympathetic vibrations. This was not a lock to be forced. It was an instrument to be played. He took a breath and began to hum. It was not a loud sound, barely more than a whisper, but it was impossibly pure. It was a single perfect note, a harmonic B-flat that seemed to spring from the very center of his being. The note didn't echo. It was absorbed by the chamber. The great hall did not amplify it. It joined it. A low, resonant hum began to rise from the very stones around them, the floor vibrating gently under their feet. The mocking laughter died in the throats of the Krillian warriors, replaced by looks of stunned confusion. The violent, crackling violet energy field around Verdict wavered. The angry static discharge softened, its color shifting to a gentle pulsing indigo. The oppressive hum of the power core quieted, harmonizing with the note Ezra held. He pulled. There was no resistance. The sword slid from its housing in the power core with a soft, metallic shing, a sound of release, of freedom. It was as easy as drawing a letter opener from an envelope. He held Verdict aloft. It was lighter than he expected, perfectly balanced. The indigo light emanating from the blade bathed his face in a calm, ethereal glow. The silence in the chamber was absolute. It was a physical weight, heavier and more profound than any sound. Every warrior, every courtier, every guard was frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Then, from the warlord's throne came a single sharp gasp. Every eye turned. Kirayan, the fierce warrior princess, the proud daughter of the warlord, was staring at him. Her face was stripped of its mockery, its arrogance, its contempt. All that remained was a raw, unfiltered awe. Her lips were parted, her golden eyes wide with an emotion so profound it bordered on reverence. As the entire court watched, she moved. Her motions were slow, involuntary, as if her body was responding to a command her mind had not yet processed. She took one step back from the throne, and then, her formidable frame trembling, she slowly, deliberately sank to her knees. Just as she knelt, the stone dais around Ezra flared with light. Holographic projections erupted from the throne and the floor, bathing the room in complex schematics and data streams. Citywide power grids, atmospheric controls, ancient and formidable defensive weapon emplacements. It was all there, and it all originated from the sword in his hand. He hadn't just claimed a title. The myth was more literal than any of them had ever dreamed. He had become the Master Key. He held Ethelgard's very existence in the palm of his hand. The immediate aftermath was a powder keg. Warlord Vorlag, his face purple with rage, bellowed for his guards to seize the human, to take the sword. "He is an off-worlder, a trickster. This is blasphemy." But the guards hesitated, their eyes locked on the shimmering projections that now filled the throne room. Ancient defensive turrets, long dormant within the city walls, swiveled and powered on, their targeting reticles sweeping across the chamber. The throne itself hummed with a power that made the warlord's stone seat seem like a cheap imitation. Verdict was not a symbol of power. It was power, and Ezra held it. "Stand down," a voice commanded, sharp and clear. It was Kirayan. She rose from her knees, her awe now forged into a hard, unreadable resolve. She drew her own blade, a wicked curved weapon of dark metal, and planted herself between Ezra and her furious father. "The judgment is absolute," she declared, her voice ringing with an authority that silenced the room. "The sword has chosen. I will not see our most sacred law defiled." She did not look at Ezra. Her focus was entirely on the warlord and his loyalists, her stance a clear challenge. She was his shield, his only defense. She framed it as a matter of honor, of tradition, but Ezra saw the conflict churning in her golden eyes. This went against every instinct she had, every lesson she had ever been taught. Later, in the opulent chambers that had belonged to the warlord an hour ago, the tension was a living thing. Ezra sat in a large, uncomfortable chair, verdict resting across his knees, its gentle indigo light pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Kirain stood guard by the door, her back ramrod straight, her hand never leaving the hilt of her sword. The silence stretched thick and heavy. "You should have been incinerated," she said finally, her voice low. The energy backlash from a failed attempt. Grak's armor was melted to his skin. What did you do?" "I listened," Ezra said simply. "Your city sings, Kirain. You've all been shouting at it for so long you forgot how to hear it." She turned to face him, her expression a maelstrom of confusion, anger, and a grudging respect she clearly found distasteful. "Singing. You claim you defeated the judgment with a song." "With a frequency," he corrected gently, "a resonant key. It wasn't about strength. It was never about strength. It was about harmony." She took a step toward him, then another until she stood over his chair, a towering, armored figure. He felt a flicker of the primal fear he'd experienced upon their first meeting, but it was different now. The power dynamic had been irrevocably scrambled. He was the ruler, yet he was utterly at her mercy. She was his subordinate, his sworn shield, yet she was the only reason he was still breathing. "Harmony," she repeated the word as if it were a foreign curse. "We are a people of action, of combat. Our harmony is the clash of blades in battle." "And that is why your people have been bleeding leaders for 100 years, fighting over a throne none of you could rightfully claim," he stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. Her jaw tightened, but she couldn't refute his words. She reached out, her gauntlet stopping just short of the glowing sword on his lap. "What is this power? What have you unleashed?" "The Founder's legacy, I imagine," he said, "the ability to build instead of break, to nurture instead of conquer." She looked from the sword to his face, her gaze intense and searching. The mockery was gone, replaced by a dangerous, unsettling curiosity. He was an enigma, a puzzle she had to solve. Her culture had prepared her for every conceivable physical threat, but it had given her no defense against a quiet man who could command ancient forces with a simple melody. She was his guard, but in that moment, as she stared down at the soft human who now held her city's fate in his hands, she felt like the most vulnerable person in the room. The first days of Ezra's rule were a study in quiet revolution. The warrior elite, loyal to the warlord and Grak, seethed in their barracks, their honor grievously wounded. They saw Ezra's victory as a trick, a desecration of their values. They watched his every move, their contempt a palpable force within the city. But Ezra did not engage them. His battlefield was not the training yard, it was the throne's command console. With Kirain at his side, a constant, watchful presence, he began to learn the city's intricate systems. He spent hours tracing the flow of energy, the distribution of resources. The throne interface was intuitive to him in a way it never could have been for a Krillian. Their minds were linear, built for tactics and direct confrontation. His was built for seeing patterns, for understanding complex, interconnected systems. It was another uniquely human trait he was only now beginning to appreciate. "The hydroponic farms in the lower sectors are operating at 60% efficiency," he noted one afternoon, his fingers dancing over the holographic displays. "Energy is being diverted to the gladiatorial stadiums and the officers' private heating grids." Kirain stood behind him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. "The warriors are of primary importance," she stated, the words a rote recitation of doctrine. "Warriors can't fight on an empty stomach," Ezra countered without looking up. "The farmers and technicians in the lower sectors feed your armies, yet they live on half rations. That's not a society, it's a parasite feeding on its own host." With a few deft commands, he rerouted the power. The lights on the schematic shifted, the flow of energy moving from the empty, unused stadiums to the vital, life-sustaining farms. Kirayan said nothing, but he could feel her stillness, the weight of her contemplation. It was a simple, logical act, yet it was so profoundly alien to her culture's rigid hierarchy that it amounted to heresy. The effects were almost immediate. Within a day, delegations from the lower sectors arrived at the throne room, not with weapons, but with offerings, rare fruits and vegetables, their faces filled with a hopeful reverence Athelgard hadn't seen in generations. They looked at Ezra not as a conqueror, but as a savior. Their gratitude was a shield more effective than any warrior. In the long hours they spent together, the dynamic between Ezra and Kirayan began to shift. The tension remained, but it was no longer born of hostility. It was a current of fascination, of discovery. He would explain a concept from human physics, and she would counter with a principle of Krillian battle strategy, and they would both find a strange, unexpected overlap. One evening, as he worked to decipher a particularly complex water reclamation schematic, he found himself struggling. He rubbed his temples, a wave of fatigue washing over him. It's a paradox. Increasing the pressure should increase the flow rate, but it's having the opposite effect. Kirayan moved to his side, her golden eyes scanning the complex hologram. She was silent for a long moment, her brow furrowed. "You are trying to force the water through," she said finally. Her voice was soft, surprisingly so. "In combat, if an enemy's shield is too strong, you do not push harder. You find the weakest point and strike there, or you create a diversion. You are thinking like a builder. Think like a warrior." She reached out, her armored fingers hovering over the display. "Here, this secondary conduit is older, less efficient. The system sees it as a vulnerability and compensates by restricting flow from the main aqueduct when pressure increases. It is protecting itself." Her finger tapped another point on the schematic. "Divert a small amount of pressure here to this overflow valve. Convince the system that the vulnerability is already being addressed. It will relax its defenses on the main line." He followed her instructions. The flow rate on the main aqueduct immediately jumped to 100%. He leaned back in his chair, looking up at her. Her face was illuminated by the soft light of the console, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Remarkable," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. A faint flush darkened the markings on her cheeks. Praise was not something she was accustomed to, especially not for her mind. "It is simple combat logic," she deflected, though she did not move away. "There is nothing simple about it," he said, his gaze holding hers. "You have a brilliant strategic mind, Kirayan." In the quiet hum of the throne room, with the life of the city pulsing around them, a new understanding passed between them. He saw past the armor to the keen intellect within, and she saw past his physical frailty to a strength she was only just beginning to comprehend. The space between them, once a battlefield of cultural contempt, was becoming something else entirely. It was becoming common ground. The duel with Grak loomed, a storm on the horizon. Ezra could feel the weight of the warrior class's expectation, their hunger for his failure, his death. Kirayan grew more tense as the day approached, her protective watch over him becoming a near-constant presence. She found him late one night in the throne's antechamber, staring out at the city lights. "You are not a warrior," she stated, her voice flat. "You cannot beat him." "I don't intend to fight him," Ezra replied, turning from the window. "I intend to win." She shook her head, a gesture of frustration. "You do not understand. For Grak, this is not about ruling. It is about honor. He will not stop until one of you is dead. Then I'll have to teach him that there are worse things than death. Humiliation, for one." She saw the cold certainty in his eyes and fell silent. She recognized that look. It was the same look her father got before a battle he knew he would win. It unsettled her to see it on the face of a man who had never held a sword in anger. "You are still tense," he observed, changing the subject. "Your people have a way of centering the mind before combat, do they not? The scholars' texts called it the Kalan core, the stillness of the soul." Kirayan blinked, surprised he had not only read about the practice, but remembered the name. "It is a discipline for warriors. It requires focus, control." "Then teach me," he said. She hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "Very well, remove your robe." The request was practical, not provocative, yet it sent a charge through the room. Ezra complied, unfastening the simple gray garment and draping it over a chair, leaving him in his black undershirt and trousers. The fabric was thin, outlining the lean, wiry strength of his frame. It was a body built for endurance and thought, not for brutal combat. "Stand here," she commanded, positioning him in the center of the room. "Your posture is wrong. A human spine is a fragile thing. You hold it as if it might break." She moved behind him, and he felt the sudden, shocking heat of her hands on his back, one between his shoulder blades, the other at the base of his spine. Her touch was firm, her armored gauntlets left on a nearby table, her bare hands radiating a startling warmth against the thin fabric of his shirt. "Straighten," she murmured, her voice close to his ear. Her fingers pressed into the muscles along his spine, not a caress but an instruction. "Feel the energy flow from the ground up through your core. A warrior is a conduit, not a container." He did as she instructed, focusing on her touch, on the heat that seemed to seep into his bones. Her proximity was overwhelming. He could smell the faint, clean scent of her skin, a mix of ozone and something uniquely Krillian that he couldn't name. "Now breathe," she commanded, "not with your chest, like a frightened child, with your diaphragm. Match my rhythm." She pressed her chest against his back, and he could feel the slow, powerful rise and fall of her own breathing. It was like being leaned against by a living statue. He focused, syncing his own breath to hers. Inhale, hold, exhale. The room seemed to fade away, the only reality being the solid wall of her body against his back, the heat of her hands, the sound of their matched breathing. "The goal is to quiet the noise," she whispered, her breath stirring the hair at the back of his neck, to find the single, pure point of focus within. But as he stood there, feeling the powerful beat of her heart against his own spine, quieting the noise was the last thing on his mind. The room was filled with it, the rustle of their clothes, the whisper of their breath, the frantic, unspoken conversation of their bodies. Her hands shifted, her thumbs tracing the lines of his shoulder blades, the gesture no longer clinical. It was exploratory. He felt a tremor run through her, an echo of the one that was shaking him. The line between a lesson and an embrace had vanished. He could feel the soft peaks of her breasts pressed against his back, the strength in her thighs as she braced herself behind him. He started to turn, to face her, to confirm that the electric current flowing between them was real. The chamber doors hissed open. The guard captain stood there, his face grim. "Arbiter, Grak has arrived at the designated sector. The duel begins." The spell was broken. Chiron snatched her hands away as if burned, stepping back quickly. A dark flush stained her cheeks. Ezra turned to face her, the antechamber suddenly feeling cold without her touch. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance a new, dangerous truth was acknowledged. He calmly picked up his robe, his movements betraying none of the turmoil within. He was ready. The derelict industrial sector was a maze of rusted gantries, silent conveyor belts, and cavernous smelting pits. A misty rain fell, slicking the metal surfaces and muffling sound. It was the perfect chessboard. From the throne room, Ezra watched on a holographic display as Grak entered the sector, a massive warhammer held loosely in one hand. The brute was a vision of Krillian martial might, his every movement radiating arrogance and bloodlust. The entire warrior class of Aethelgard watched from remote pict screens, eager for the human slaughter. "He is in his element," Kirian said, her voice tight. She stood beside the throne, her arms crossed, a dozen conflicting emotions warring on her face. A closed space, a simple objective: kill your enemy, he will hunt you down and crush you. "Only if I play his game," Ezra replied. He rested his hands on the throne's control surface. The holographic display zoomed in, showing a heat signature of Grak moving through the labyrinthine structures. A series of command runes glowed at Ezra's fingertips. The objective is not to kill him, it is to prove he is obsolete. With a thought, he activated his first move. A heavy iron door 50 yards in front of Grak slammed shut with a deafening clang. The sound echoed through the sector. Grak roared in frustration and charged, smashing the door from its hinges with a single mighty blow of his hammer. From the viewing rooms, the warriors cheered. Kirayan looked at Ezra. "That was your plan?" "A diversion," Ezra said calmly. While Grak was focused on the door, Ezra silently activated a magnetic crane far above him. A massive sheet of corroded metal held in place for a century was released. It didn't fall on Grak, but slammed down behind him, blocking his only exit. He was trapped in the initial corridor. Grak spun around, his roar of fury turning into one of confusion as he found his path blocked. The cheering from the warriors faltered. "Now," Ezra murmured, "we begin." For the next hour, Ezra orchestrated a symphony of frustration. He didn't attack Grak directly. He manipulated the environment. He rerouted steam through pipes to obscure visibility, activated ancient conveyor belts to carry Grak in the wrong direction, and used magnetic clamps to seal passages just as the warrior approached. Grak, a creature of pure physical reaction, could only respond with brute force. He smashed, crushed, and bellowed, wasting his formidable energy against an enemy who wasn't there. He was fighting the factory itself, and the factory had a far superior mind. The climax of the duel came as Grak, exhausted and enraged, finally spotted Ezra. The human stood on a high gantry across a deep smelting pit. There was no way across except for a narrow maintenance bridge. With a final triumphant roar, Grak charged onto the bridge, his hammer raised, victory in his eyes. The warriors watching leaned in, certain this was the end. Ezra didn't move. He simply watched the brute approach. When Grak was halfway across, Ezra spoke, his voice calm and clear through the sector's comms system. "Grak, I will feast on your bones, human," Grak bellowed, breaking into a run. Ezra sighed softly and tapped a single rune on the throne's console. The maintenance bridge did not fall. Instead, two massive hydraulic arms, previously hidden within the gantry's structure, swung out with incredible speed. They didn't strike Grak. They clamped down on the head of his warhammer, trapping it instantly. The momentum of his charge, combined with the immovable grip on his weapon, sent Grak flying over the top, his own strength used against him. He dangled there, suspended over the smelting pit, his hands still stubbornly gripping the hammer that was his undoing. He was utterly defeated, utterly humiliated, without a single blow having been struck. A profound silence fell over Athelgard. The warrior class stared at their screens, their faces blank with disbelief. They had just witnessed their greatest champion be comprehensively dismantled by a series of levers and pulleys, operated by a man sitting calmly in a chair miles away. He hadn't just defeated Grak. He had invalidated their entire philosophy of strength. Ezra looked at Kirayan. Her mouth was slightly agape, her eyes wide with the same awe he'd seen when he first drew the sword. He had shown her a new kind of power once again, not with a song this time, but with strategy. "Do you see now?" he asked quietly. She could only nod, her gaze fixed on the image of her former betrothed, dangling helplessly like a child's toy. Grak's humiliation shattered the warlord's remaining authority. The warrior class, their champion defeated and their ideology invalidated, fell into disarray. Support for Ezra, the quiet, thoughtful ruler who made the farms productive and the water run clean, swelled into a tidal wave. The transition was bloodless. Vorlog was allowed to retire to his private estates, a broken old man, his power fading into history. Ethelgard had a new leader. Ezra stood in the throne room, the chamber quiet save for the soft hum of the city's heart. He held verdict, its weight familiar in his hands, its indigo light a comforting presence. He had not sought this power, but he would wield it for the good of this city and its people. A sound at the doorway made him turn. Kirayan stood there, not in her armor, but in the simple dark blue robes of a Krillian courtier. The change was startling. Without the hard, metallic shell, she seemed both softer and more formidable. The severe braid was gone, her stark white hair falling freely around her shoulders. She walked toward him, her movements still possessing their feline grace, but without the aggressive edge. She stopped before him, her golden eyes searching his. "It is done," she said. "The factions have sworn allegiance. My father has abdicated. The city is yours." "Ours," he corrected gently. A small smile, the first genuine smile he had ever seen from her, touched her lips. "I have spent my life believing that strength was measured by the weight of the sword in your hand. I thought you were weak because you did not carry one." She reached out and laid her hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, her skin soft against his. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, a stark contrast to her first aggressive prod. "I was wrong," she whispered. "Your strength is here." She tapped his temple with a single finger. "And here," she moved her hand to rest over his heart. "It is a strength my people had forgotten, a strength I never knew I craved." He covered her hand with his own, his thumb stroking the back of her knuckles. The same electric current he'd felt during their meditation lesson returned, but this time there was no interruption, no battle to be fought. "Your strength is what kept me alive to use mine," he said, his voice low. "They are two sides of the same blade, Khura'in. One is useless without the other." She stepped closer, her body now flush against his. She looked from his eyes to the sword he still held. "My father wished for me to rule beside a warrior. I will rule beside a king." He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision of two worlds, of fire and focus, of passion and intellect. It was the taste of victory, the heat of the forge, the hum of the city's soul, and the promise of a future they would build together. Her hands came up to cup his face, her touch possessive and tender all at once. His free arm went around her waist, pulling her impossibly closer, the hilt of verdict pressed between them. The source of their power, the symbol of their union. In the heart of the ancient city, the human diplomat and the warrior princess sealed their alliance not with a treaty, but with a searing, passionate kiss, forging a new dynasty from the ashes of a broken tradition. Ethelgard would no longer be ruled by strength alone, but by a harmony far more powerful.